This video studies extract 2 from the F585 source material. UK net trade and international competitiveness. From the introduction to the source material, we can see that the lack of international competitiveness for UK products is a worry for economic growth. It points us to this issue again of the government policy to rebalance, that is, have more exports as opposed to just products for internal consumption. It looks at how the UK government has undertaken supply-side policies to improve competitiveness. The definitions you need to understand right at the start are the graph showing the balance of trade, X minus M, which is the main component of the current account of the balance of payments, and the idea of competitiveness, which in this extract they define very, very broadly with an international measure we'll see later. But the basic heart of competitiveness is being able to produce your goods cheaply compared to your international rivals, and therefore your exports doing well. Now you might achieve that through a low exchange rate, or through the low cost of your production, the low unit labour cost, or having a comparative advantage. The data overall on the balance of trade shows a very slight improvement. Let's look now at possible causes and consequences of that trade deficit. So what are the causes of this trade deficit shown here in the graph? Well, one cause you'd expect is cyclical, except with the cyclical argument, as an economy reaches recession, as we have had since 2008, you'd expect the deficit to get better. Now that might account for some of the improvement in 2011-2012, but what's probably happening is that although we have had dampened demand for imports because of recession, which should reduce the deficit, there's been dampened demand for our exports too, because other countries in the world are suffering the Great Recession. So weak global demand, particularly from the Eurozone, who we trade with a lot, as you know from the other extracts, might account for some of the continued trade deficit. The other big issue is it's a structural deficit, that we don't really have a comparative advantage in the kind of manufacturing and traded goods that we're still producing a bit. We cannot compete with the BRICS. Our unit labour costs have risen compared to those of the emerging economies, these BRICS, these cheap labour economies. Our productivity overall has grown very poorly over the last 10 years. However, there is evidence further on in the extract that our overall competitiveness is improving, and all these points are a struggle for all developed countries compared to the rising power of the tiger economies. Finally, and most relevant to this exact period, is the fact that the exchange rate depreciated really quite significantly by about 20% following the Great Recession. If the pound weakens, you'd expect the balance of trade to improve. Now what you could say here is that it hasn't improved very much, because maybe the Marshall-Lerner condition doesn't hold. That is, our exports are not and imports are not very elastic, so just because they've got cheaper hasn't improved them. Or you could say that that improvement you see a little bit in 2011-2012 is at this beginning to take hold, but there's a delay. That delay argument is called the J-curve effect. There's a link here if you want to follow up on this a little bit more. What then are the consequences of the trade deficit? Well, there's a clue in the stimulus here that I've highlighted. Net trade continues to be a drag on growth. So in the simple demand side point, you've got a trade deficit. That means you're spending on imports, which are not a component of AD, and there's less spending on exports, which is a component of AD. If only we could get X up, we'd have a multiplied increase in national income and greater jobs, job creation. More likely, we need to worry about the supply side effect of this. The fact that this shows that there hasn't been a rebalancing as promised with the March of the Makers from George Osborne towards manufacturing, and given that we live in an era of globalization, this need to compete and be competitive in world trade is only going to get greater. Good news at last. Here in this section of the extract, we see that the UK has moved from 12th in 2008-9 to 8th place in the WEF's Global Competitiveness Rankings. So here you can use this for evaluation. Actually, the UK is a pretty competitive economy. Now, what you'll see here is, unlike normal competitiveness measure, which is just how cheap our goods are compared to competitors, what they look at here are areas of supply side quality, really, that make us more productive. And this kind of productivity means that we can produce goods more cheaply or better quality goods. And if you can produce better quality goods with better quality labour because of supply side policies, because of productivity, then you're going to be competitive. This suggests the kind of policies, supply side policies, you might want to have to improve competitiveness in the long run. It suggests that it's beginning to work, and the rest of the extract shows the government's plan for growth from 2011, which has policies along these lines. A little nugget on this for your exam is that in fact we have fallen to 9th place in the most recent rankings on this. Another slightly disappointing evaluation of the evaluation here is that although this is good news that we are 8th, or in fact 9th now, in this global competitiveness ranking, bear in mind that all the other countries at the top are highly developed countries, and as the emerging economies of the world become more and more developed, they will be able to compete on these levels of sophistication and technology, as well as being cheap. So what are the benefits of competitiveness? Well, fairly obviously, what you get if you're more competitive, you have cheaper and better quality products. That means more exports, less imports, because UK products can compete better with imports, and that improves the balance in trade, and so the current account. If we have an improving current account on the balance of payments, we'll have to borrow less from abroad, and there'll be less foreign ownership of UK assets. More exports leads to increases in GDP as well, so the one benefit of improving competitiveness is that you should have higher living standards because the economy will grow. It creates jobs in the export sector. We should be more balanced. Again, this march of the makers idea, and balanced growth so that plenty of our production goes to exports should mean that we're less reliant on the UK's demand, and so there's less of an abrupt multiplier effect when there's a recession. It should be more stable. And increased competitiveness reduce costs. If you think of the SRAS shifting to the right, that'll reduce costs, which of course is disinflationary. So what does the extract say about the way in which we can improve UK competitiveness? Well, one thing it doesn't say is that we should have protectionism and intervention to prevent imports coming in or subsidise our exports. If we put tariffs up, even if the WTO didn't manage to stop us, it would create retaliation, what we call beggar thy neighbour policies, where all our competitors would also put up tariffs and quotas, and then we'd all end up having less trade and therefore less advantage, mutual advantage from comparative advantage. Subsidies, although tempting, disincentivize real improvements with firms because they know that they don't have to become more competitive themselves by producing more efficiently because the government gives them a subsidy. And besides, which firms would you choose to subsidise? You can't subsidise them all, so there's a problem of picking winners. And the other problem is that the firms that you most likely will end up subsidising, the big exporters, will just have their monopoly power in the UK entrenched, whereas competition from abroad should make them behave like a competitive firm with all the concomitant welfare gains. No, there's no going back on global competition. We have to work out a way to compete, not to shy away from it and protect ourselves. One way to do that is to keep real wages low through flexible labour markets. Now, This is something that Britain has done well compared to Western European countries, and it is a real advantage. And you do need to make sure that your wages and your cost of employing people and the overall package for your workforce is not so high as to impede competitiveness. That'll be part of the solution, but it can't be a really true long-term solution for a developed country, because you're never going to compete purely on low wages with countries like China and the emerging economies. The real true answer must be productivity. If we can produce our goods more efficiently, that's more output per worker. That means that they will be cheaper without needing low wages. That'll make them better quality and cheaper, so we need supply side policies to improve productivity, output per unit input. And the difficult thing there is, of course, our competitors will be doing the same. So it will only really work to improve competitiveness if we do better at this than other countries. And this is really the rest of the extract, is outlining the government's plan for growth, which is aimed at rebalancing the economy and improving UK competitiveness through supply side measures. From the extract then, here's the 4 points that are in the government's 2011 plan for growth. The first one in the main part of the text is the aim to rebalance the economy by encouraging UK growth of exports and foreign direct investment. This will obviously be a key part of the questions on this paper, this idea of rebalancing towards UK exports and foreign direct investment will also improve the supply side of the economy, because it brings investment, this time from foreign firms, into the UK, starting factories, employing people like Nissan in Sunderland and so forth. The second measure, another supply side measure, is to reduce taxes, simplify them, and both of which make business more competitive with other countries. That's because they have less bureaucratic burden and they can produce more cheaply if taxes are lower and simpler. It will also help encourage FDI, of course. Third, make the UK more attractive to start businesses. The aim here is particularly to improve the number of and quality of small to medium-sized enterprises, SMEs. Small firms basically are great for employment and innovation. Proportionately, small firms employ more people and are more innovative than large firms. Labour market flexibility is the fourth plank of the UK plan for growth. This will do two things. One, it will improve productivity by having more education and allowing the right people to get to the right jobs and the labour force to respond to changes in the structure of the economy, thus reducing structural unemployment as well as improving growth. But also, labour market flexibility keeps wages low, which helps in the most simple part of productivity, which is producing cheaply. Looking at the plan for growth on the government's own website, I'm afraid the numbering is slightly different here. You can see again how they definitely phrase the whole plan for growth in terms of competitiveness. Encourage investment and exports as a route to a more balanced economy. Create an educated workforce that is the most flexible in Europe, to make the UK one of the best places in Europe to start, finance and grow business, and to have the most competitive tax system of all the 20 largest economies in the world, the G20. The government's economic policy objective, it says at the top, is to achieve strong, sustained and balanced growth, more evenly shared across the country and between industries. So we can see here the definition of balanced growth again. Balanced growth between industries, shared across the country, and a strong aspect of exports and FDI and being open. All the supply side policies that could go into this would make the economy more productive. And I'm afraid there was some good news earlier in the piece about the UK's competitiveness on the WEF rankings going to 9th from 12th. But as you can see, in fact, in 1998 we were 4th. So before the period that the extract covers, we were more competitive. So just to put everything into context, one of the reasons why the government had this 2011 plan for growth was the real worry that we had slipped behind in terms of competitiveness compared to other countries in Europe. In this section of the extract you have 6 examples of the kind of policies the government has put in place to achieve the aims in its plan for growth. This is we can run through these pretty quickly. They're fairly obvious and don't need an enormous amount of explanation or background, but they're great for you and in the exam because you can just know that they're there and flick to them if you want a specific example of a supply side policy aimed at improving growth or balanced growth in the UK. So what have we got? Investment. Well, we know investment increases LRAS, and investment in government infrastructure should have positive externalities on private sector investment, because you've got the infrastructure there to work with if you're a private sector firm, which is a positive externality. So that's a good one. Increases LRAS, good for growth, boosts the private sector as well by having the infrastructure. B, increased access to finance for business. Well, we talked about this before. For small and medium-sized enterprises, it's really, really important for businesses to be able to raise money if they're going to be able to start. So if we're going to have the best level of startups in Europe, well, we need some lending for them, and the government's guaranteeing that with the funding for lending scheme and the business bank. Good examples, specific examples to grab for your essay if you need it. Encouraging businesses to invest again. Well, there you go. So we have a tax break, a tax allowance for investment. You subsidising it effectively. That increases SRAS, probably LRAS too. Cutting corporation tax, similar kind of thing. What might be useful here for your exam is just knowing that corporation tax has been cut from 23% down to 20%. That steady cut in corporation tax makes us a good place for FDI as well, for foreign companies to come and do business, but of course also just makes there be more funds available for firms from their profit in order to invest. Corporation tax is a tax on profits, by the way. Simplifying business regulation, we mentioned that before. Reducing bureaucracy, reduces costs for business, makes them more competitive. And your classic supply side policy, isn't it? Creating an educated workforce. You know, you do that, you improve human capital and hence LRAS. So, to summarise, this extract is all about the UK struggling with a significant trade deficit because of some structural factors to do with it being not very competitive. And there are all sorts of reasons why the UK is not competitive, but to solve those problems we're going to need to improve productivity. If we can improve productivity, we'll be able to export again much more. That'll make the UK economy more balanced, more competitive, and that will promote growth. Has the government's strategy plan for growth succeeded? Well, it takes a long time for these supply side policies to work, so it's a bit unfair to judge them. However, the deficit still is huge and is continuing beyond the to be big even now. And Keynesians would argue that all this policy focused on the supply side forgets the fact that in the here and now we need to boost aggregate demand. Set against that, we can see the latest figures for the UK economy do show improved growth and lower unemployment. So by the time you take your exam, there'll be some signs, I think, that the UK economy is growing, although whether it's balanced growth is another matter altogether. Thank you for listening to this video based on extract 2 of the F585 OCR economics paper. Don't forget to check the website www.tnml.ch/eco for more info and connected articles.